going back to the history of currency creation and all that of trying to come up with a sort of alternative schemes on how communities could support each other. I got into the Peace Corps and came to Kenya as a volunteer, and I started basically taking some of the stuff I was studying in the U.S. and trying to apply it in cases where people really were chronically lacking cash.
How do you bootstrap trust? And I think that's the biggest problem we have as society right now. How do you trust your neighbors? How do you create community around yourself in a time where everything's sort of risky? You can't even like talk to your neighbor without spit particles hitting them, or that sort of thing. It's really an interesting time right now in terms of how do we, in this isolation, create community and trust each other. Let communities do what banks do, and let's de-risk it, right? Let's do it on chain so you know what the collateral is, right? Let them create their tokens, credit, just like banks create their credit, but let's do it totally transparently and honestly, right? And if you want to, like, we've had banks collapse left and right in Kenya, I mean, for years. And so in this system, if you want to oversupply credit like those banks do without any collateral, well, it's going to drop your token price, right? And so like that's the whole idea of having some basic, really simple protocols or rules on how to create your credit system and how to link them together.
So welcome to our Fireside chat. We have Will Ruddick, founder and leader of Grassroots economics, and also Community Inclusive Currencies. So maybe the first question will be about that. What is one thing? What is the other?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks for having me. So I've been pretty much an activist most of my life, but I by kind of profession, I was a physicist that got into economics and was doing agent-based modeling around foreign exchange, community currencies back 25 or so years ago, and these were like very grassroots movements of people in all over the world that were trying to create their own medium of exchange to create solidarity and community and resilience. And so as people sort of get this idea of like, well, can we as a community create a currency? And we've got this whole history of like just recent history of like starting with Bitcoin and essentially people saying, okay, yeah, anyone can make a token, I can make a Tron coin, you can make a what coin, and all this kind of stuff. And so there's been this sort of bloom of people sort of getting that concept of what does it mean to create a currency, or what does it mean to create a medium of exchange. And so I'm enjoying that a lot of the movement around blockchain is sort of reawakening people's sort of passion and also making it very simple to technically create currencies and do it in ways where they can all connect with each other and also potentially connect with fiat as well, and have kind of safe membranes for how to do so. So that's kind of what's really exciting right now. So in Kenya, we've got about 12,000 users right now that are generally like groups of 25 women in a what they call chama, and they are doing savings and loan with each other. And so basically what they're doing is they're using a bonding curve, which is basically to say that they're taking some national currency, they're holding it into something like a trust. So there's a contract holding that national currency right now in the form of XDAI. So it's a side chain off Ethereum, basically holding DAI. It's a forked or a hard spoon DAI. And so they hold that collateral and they create a credit system around that collateral. So for instance, they have 10,000 shillings of collateral, which would be like 100 DAI, and they're creating 40,000 tokens. And that leverage that they have right there is based roughly on how big is that collateral that they have, and what's their sort of history as a group. And so when they deploy that contract right now, and we're sort of doing it on their behalf through USSD feature phone. So they basically say, deploy this contract. They mint those tokens. They're using them in the community to basically fill the gaps that is missing from the Kenyan shilling, right? So there's tons of goods and services that can be traded. There's just not enough money to trade them with. And so they're just basically issuing a credit. They're the spot price. So think about these tokens on a bonding curve as essentially like shares. So it's shares of a backing asset. And so it's similar to like if you've got shares in a house. As people start withdrawing those funds from the backing, or like removing the wood from the house, the share value starts to drop.
but then it also becomes cheap to add more shares, or add more reserve, add more capital to the system and mint some of those tokens. So basically, there's kind of a market stabilization around the price. And so it's a really basically simple 2-token model of saying you've got a reserve as collateral and you're issuing credit based on it. And to me, it's a very like open and honest way of doing what banks kind of do. But with a bank, you really don't know what's behind it. It's really hard to audit, actually what's behind the bank's credit. And yet the bank calls that credit a US dollar. And so they're inflating the monetary supply all the time. While in our case, we would say, no, it's not a US dollar. It's a Wells Fargo credit, or it's a, this group of women's credit, whatever they've called it. And then bringing in Red Cross. So we've got Red Cross now basically looking at how to scale these things out and support communities that are experiencing crisis right now. How can they keep food systems alive? How can we employ 1 million people in Kenya right now to bolster the food supply system, the food system, because it's not good right now. We've got locusts, we've got economic collapse, and there's no money. So and we can't. So everyone needs food. Everyone needs farming. No one can pay for it, and it's this sort of ridiculous situation where it's like your construction worker comes back and says, "Hey, boss, I've run out of inches." How can we run out of money? As a society, we shouldn't be able to. Essentially, it's just a measurement tool, and so that's a kind of in a nutshell what we're doing right now. We're basically creating a decentralized credit space where every community can create their own credit system. They can back it with some collateral so that they can all trade with each other. So that collateral essentially gives each community a relative price, and that those credits can continue circulating, and we measure that circulation as well as part of our impact. So like with Red Cross, like they're helping put seed fund into the collateral of those systems because it's giving them like 10 to 20x the impact, right? Because instead of just handing out money to a community, like donating euros into Kenya, they say, well, why can't we just let the communities create their own currencies and just give them some collateral behind it so that we essentially de-risk?
You are talking to me about two different worlds. Okay, from one side, you're talking about real people with liquidity issues in Kenya, with real humanitarian problems there. From the other side, you are talking about token funding curves, the Ethereum side change, XDAI. How do you bound those two totally different worlds? How do you make those two things?
I mean, okay, so from an interface perspective, and just like a UX perspective, Kenya's a bit of a special place because people are used to using e-money on their little Nokia phones with no internet. And so we basically just copied those interfaces in Kenya. So essentially you dial a little short code, we've got these kind of like placards sitting up at a business that says like your phone number and what code to dial. And so you dial that little code on your phone and you get this little menu that says, check my wallet balance, right? And so we take that message, we query the blockchain, we spit it back onto their phone. So we're, we're acting in a way as sort of a managed, system in order for them to use it. But then they can also use it on their smartphones, holding their own private keys and everything like that. But that's the work in progress right now. So mostly we're just working with these USSD interface. And it's really simple. Basically, if I want to send to someone, all I have to do is type in their phone number. I say the amount. I have a PIN. I hit send. That's it. They got their, so each party gets an SMS after that says their new balances and that the transfer went through. Everything's recorded on the blockchain. So from that perspective, it's a really simple system. I mean, people are used to that already in Kenya. Like to send someone money, all I need to know is their phone number anywhere in Kenya. And Kenya's been the biggest, I think, fastest country in the world that like fully adopts, e-money in that sense to use. And the question is, where do you buy stuff? That's it. So like, I've got these tokens. What can I buy with them? That's all someone really needs to know. I check my balance. I've got 200 in it. Can I buy 200 shillings of flour from that shop? If yes, okay. There's no real question.
Since you were talking about collateral, what are your thoughts or your research about having different kind of collateral in Bitcoin, for example?
Yeah, actually, I was just talking to a group about that concept as well, and I think for now, the US dollar to Kenyan shilling is a very stable thing. So using XDAI right now as a sort of a synthetic Kenyan shilling is just super easy to do. It's just functional. That's it. I mean, but I think there's a really big world opening up. And if you really get the concept between credit space and reserve space, right? That you can have reserve or collateral, which is like a reserve currency is much more of like a unit of account versus a credit space, which is more like promissory notes, right? It's our willingness to support each other and help each other versus the reserve is really what we deem as sort of valuable. And if we grow that space into saying we value the environment, we want to have indexes for different commodities and natural resources. I mean, there's all sorts of, I think, beautiful ways in the future that we can sort of progress in terms of this concept of reserve. And it could be there's many, every country or, could come up with a reserve. And, I think that's a really, and we could use other tokens like Bitcoin. We could use, guys have been doing multi-collateral, CDPs for a while. So you could put all kinds of tokens into your reserve and make it into a very stable basket and things like that. So I'm excited about that space, but for now, I'm just sort of punting that. I'm just saying, look, we've got XDAI for the moment. This is filling our need for a common shared value right now for, women trading vegetables in Kenya in terms of reserve. You could have many different reserves and they could, you could have relays, you could have ways to connect them together at this sort of like higher level. But at the lower level, it's just this sort of credit space among people of being able to trust each other and using those reserves as a proxy for, de-risking essentially that trust.
I wanted to bring this back to the situation that we're confronting right now with the coronavirus and the crisis that we have just, around us. Have you noticed any difference in the places where you have implemented the currency, the local currency? I mean, what's that like?
Yeah, no, we've seen like a 3x growth in usage just this like in the last week. Really, it's really going really really fast. And it's just one, people don't want to use paper money anyways, because the government's even said don't use paper money and stuff like that. So there's that aspect, but it's also just people don't have money anyways. I think there's a lot of communities coming together right now that they're being told by the government to isolate. But they've got no food in their house, right? And they've got, they still need, to support each other in lots of different ways. And so, for communities to come together and co-support each other at this time, I think is really powerful. What happens is that the chamas, these group accounts that, where it's like a group of women, what happens is that the Red Cross is essentially coming in and saying, we will basically support the reserves of these groups. So they allow those groups to basically do some cashing out every month. And so that's sort of also like a pressure release. It also builds that trust. So because it's connected to fiat, essentially it allows everyone to trust it and use it, right?
At what stage you are in the implementation of the project, and how large is your user base at the moment?
Yeah, so we've got about 12,000 people signed up. I think almost 13,000 right now, and it's growing pretty fast. I mean, right now on the order of like 50 to 100 signups a day. And in terms of transactions, I think we're seeing about, I think in the last few days, like 1,200 transactions a day on the network, which I think puts us pretty close to the top of sure, used blockchain projects, I think right now. And we're just, awesome. So like in the next 3 months, we're expecting to scale up to maybe 40,000 users. And that's just one small area where we're working with Red Cross, and the goal is to really expand, use that as proof of concept and really expand out all over.
I'm amazed by the numbers that Will are sharing. I think that more than 1,000 transactions per day for a project like this that is really solving humanitarian needs is very huge. So big compliments on that, Will. Thanks for the labor that you're doing.
Yes.